My name is Eva. I'm 16 years old, living in the northern suburbs of Chicago with my mom and stepdad. On paper, our house was supposed to be safe, but in reality, it felt like a prison decorated with fancy curtains and spotless appliances. That night, winter was setting in, the wind biting cold against my skin. I ran out of the house that was flooding with water, clutching tightly a stack of papers where every page spelled out clearly, "Permission in writing is required to touch any object." My stepdad's name is William. He was sprawled out on the kitchen floor, trapped under a washing machine weighing hundreds of pounds that had slammed into his legs. His screams of pain echoed through the house, which was dimming as the power flickered. And me? I stood on the porch, eyes fixed on the flashing ambulance lights washing over the quiet street. Neighbors stood still, a few raising their phones to record. I could have saved him, but I wasn't allowed to touch anything in the house without written permission. That was his rule. And tonight, he was crushed by the very rule he created. Have you ever lived in a house where every cup, every chair became a weapon to control you? Have you ever been called a troublemaker just because you wanted to flip on a light switch when it was dark? If this makes you pause, leave a comment below. Like and subscribe so you won't miss the tangled story that follows, because what happened after that washing machine was only the beginning. I was born in Illinois, but my real memory of home didn't begin in the city. It began when my mom remarried William. He was a successful man, a senior financial manager at an investment firm. When William came into our lives, my mom, Caroline, changed. She had once been an independent elementary school teacher, always smiling even when I burned cookies or spilled flour all over the kitchen. But from the day William moved in, that smile began to fade. Family dinners became rare, replaced by silent evenings in a house so spotless it felt lifeless. William wasn't the type to yell or hit. His weapons were silence and rules. Everything in the house was arranged down to the inch. Chairs had to be at a 45-degree angle to the dining table. Couch cushions had to line up exactly with the seams. He kept a black leather notebook where he documented the position of every object, complete with diagrams and notes. At first, I thought he was just overly tidy, until it escalated into something far more extreme. One Monday morning after spring break, I came home from school to find a color-printed notice taped in the middle of the living room. Bold letters underlined 3 times, "No touch rule, effective immediately." I read it over and over, thinking my mom had accidentally brought home a classroom rule chart, but no. William stepped out of his office, eyes still on his phone, and said matter-of-factly, "Eva, from today on, you are not allowed to touch any item in this house without explicit written permission. Any violation will result in family disciplinary action." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "You're serious?" William lifted his head, expressionless. "Very serious. This is to instill discipline and respect for personal space." My mom was standing in the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands, her face stricken but silent. I looked at her, waiting for her to protest. She turned away. I flopped onto the sofa, reaching for the TV remote. William immediately stepped forward, his voice flat. "Did you ask permission?" "Permission to turn on the TV?" "Correct. You'll need Form A-2 requests for electronic device access." I gave a shaky laugh, thinking he was obsessed with work forms. But when he handed me a stack of printed sheets, each labeled with titles, date fields, and signature lines, I realized he wasn't joking. The first 3 days, I tried to live normally, but it was impossible. I wasn't allowed to open the fridge for water, turn on my bedroom light, or touch my school books without filling out Form B1, request for personal study materials. Even flipping the ceiling fan required submitting a request 24 hours in advance. I asked my mom, "Don't you think this is insane?" She turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just temporary, sweetheart. He has his reasons." I didn't know what those reasons were. All I knew was that I felt like a stranger in my own home. At dinner, I couldn't serve myself without permission. Sometimes William would ask, "Did you file Form D3 to use a spoon?" I sat frozen, tears stinging my eyes, swallowing my anger. One Saturday afternoon after tutoring, I found my desk dismantled. My books were packed into a cardboard box labeled "Items Not Yet Authorized." On the desk was a single sheet. Eva must submit a request for study materials, deadline Monday, 7 a.m. My fists clenched. I wanted to scream. But in that house, every sound was smothered, not by tape, but by William's steel gaze and heavy footsteps as he inspected doors, light switches, and chairs. I once thought being obedient might make my mom happy, but now I realized her silence gave William the excuse to prolong his no-touch rule. A week later, I woke at 5:30 a.m. to get ready for school. In the bathroom, I discovered the toilet paper was gone. In its place was a printed notice. Access denied. You have not completed Form C2. Failure to comply will result in suspension of use for 72 hours. Beneath it was an illustration of how to fill out the form. I sank onto the floor, tears streaming. But when I heard William's footsteps in the hallway, I wiped them quickly. I refused to let him see me weak. That night, I stayed up until dawn, printing dozens of permission slips, stuffing them into my backpack. If William wanted control through paperwork, I would drown him in it. Obeying didn't mean surrendering. I couldn't choose who my mom loved, but I could choose to use his own rules against him. I started each day as if I were a clerk in some bizarre office. Before leaving my room, I checked my temporary access binder, every permission slip William had signed. Some days, just to drink water, I needed to submit a request the night before and tape a note on the glass. Authorized for use until 8 a.m. tomorrow. What I once took for granted became a mental endurance test. The fridge was always full, but I could only access it between 6:30 and 7 a.m., and only with completed Form F2. If I forgot the date, the form was void. There were nights I stood starving, staring at the glowing fridge light I couldn't touch. The house felt like a laboratory. William inspected every trace: door handles for sweat, cups for displacement, chairs for misalignment. Every slip-up was documented. Eva touched door handle without permission, 7:34 a.m. Violation of Clause 1C. So I chose silence. No resistance, no confrontation. I let him fall into his own trap. 3 days into my strict compliance, the kitchen trash began to reek. I couldn't touch the bags without written approval, and William forgot to grant access while buried in work reports. The bin overflowed, liquid leaking onto the floor. My mom wiped it up silently. When William asked why the trash wasn't taken out, I simply looked at the rule sheet taped to the fridge. He froze for a moment, then reluctantly signed a slip too late. The garbage truck had already passed. For 7 days, rotting trash sat in our yard. Flies swarmed, the stench invaded every room. At dinner, William grimaced over his organic salad and carrot juice. I sat quietly, eating my ration measured on an electronic scale, in a glass container labeled Eva, approved portion. The stricter I followed the rules, the more chaotic the house became. Piles of dishes, unwashed floors, a living room gathering dust because I wasn't authorized to clean. Some days, William misplaced his office key. When I reached to help, he snapped, "Stop, don't touch." I stepped back, watching him spend 20 minutes searching for what I could have handed him in 10 seconds. My mom grew weary, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. One night I overheard her whisper, "I can't keep living like this." But when William entered, she fell silent, her expression frozen. School was worse. I couldn't use his computer. My books were locked away. I scribbled notes on scrap paper with stubby pencils. After 3 weeks, missed assignments piled up. Teachers noticed. Mrs. Morrison, my English teacher, pulled me aside. I said only, I'm not allowed to use my books. She didn't believe me. Later, I was summoned to the principal's office. In that softly lit room, the principal and a counselor asked if I was facing restrictions at home. I just nodded. Words felt too heavy to compress into sentences, but I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. Soon, I was assigned to a counselor named Ravi. He didn't push. He simply asked, if there's one thing you could change right now, what would it be? I paused for a long time. Finally, I whispered, I want to turn on a light without asking permission. Ravi didn't laugh. He wrote it down and nodded. I wasn't sure what he'd do with that. But days later, the school emailed my mom, requesting a discussion about teaching methods and student access to learning materials. William was furious, calling me a liar, demanding to see every school letter, drafting cold responses laced with threats. I wasn't surprised when my mom stayed silent, stirring cold coffee like she was stirring nothingness. I spent more time in the backyard, not for sunshine, but because I couldn't re-enter the house without prior authorization. Once, I forgot my phone and waited nearly 40 minutes outside until my mom opened the door. I couldn't press the doorbell, it was electronic, another forbidden object. Neighbors noticed. Rosa, the widow next door with silver hair and a warm voice, often glanced over the fence. Once, she handed me an iced tea, whispering, "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I smiled, lying. I just like being outside. She didn't believe me. Her eyes carried the weight of a mother who knew what it was like to watch a child carry fear. From then, I felt her presence each afternoon, a silent witness as I waited in the yard. That evening, drizzle tapped the windows. I sat in the kitchen on the only chair I was authorized to use between 4 and 6 p.m. On the table lay my request form for washing machine access, stamped pending. The machine had been running since yesterday. I'd started it Monday morning before William added a new rule. Do not touch appliances, even if already in use, without separate authorization. Since then, I couldn't turn it off or open the door. Every rotation made the tile floor groan. It sounded like a warning no one wanted to hear. William hadn't noticed yet. He was in his office, barking into the phone. My mom was teaching online. I sat there, listening to the grinding of the drum, each spin another sign that something was about to give way. It started shaking harder. At first, just a faint rattle, then it turned into pounding, like someone hammering the wall. I stood up instinctively, but as I was about to step forward, I froze. I wasn't allowed. I bit my lip, watching the machine thrash as if it was about to break free from the floor. Just then, William opened the kitchen door, his voice sharp. "What's making all that noise?" He saw the washer, frowned. "Why didn't you turn this off?" I looked up. I didn't have permission. William's eyes bulged. "Don't be ridiculous. That thing's about to explode. Since Monday, you forbade me from touching any appliance without approval. The washer form hasn't been signed." I said it calmly, each word landing sharp in the air. William rushed toward the machine, muttering that I was sabotaging his property. He didn't notice the slick tile floor, wet from the leaks. His foot slipped just as the washer jolted violently. In an instant, the machine broke free as if lifted by some unseen force. The screech of metal tore through the air as the water pipe ripped from the wall, spraying like a fire hose across the kitchen. I gripped the table edge. Mom had just run in when, in its final violent spin, the washer tipped forward and slammed into William's legs. He screamed. The sound ripped across the room, long and raw, from somewhere deep inside him. His body crashed into the cabinets, splintering the wood, tearing a door off its hinges. I saw his left knee bent unnaturally, and his right leg trapped between the machine and the wall. Mom lunged forward, shouting, "Eva!" Pull the washer back. Help me. I stepped back. I'm not allowed. She snapped her head toward me. What? I pointed at the paper still lying on the table, my voice tight. I need written permission to touch the washer. He hasn't signed it. William groaned from the floor, gasping. Don't touch my things. Mom dropped down, trying to push the machine back, but the floor was slick with water. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. A woman's voice answered, warm yet firm. I explained everything, even that I couldn't help because of the no-touch rule. There was a pause on the line. I thought she had disconnected, but then she replied softly, "Emergency units are on the way. Your report is noted." 9 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The siren wasn't loud, but enough to draw the whole neighborhood's eyes. Neighbors gathered on porches, including Rosa. I saw her holding her phone up, recording as the paramedics rushed inside. They stopped for a moment, staring at the scene, an older man pinned beneath a washer, spilling water across the floor, his face pale with pain, a woman crying in desperation, and a teenage girl standing dry in the corner, not even a hem of her shirt wet. "We can lift it," one paramedic said, "but the floor's too slick. We need to block the front wheels first." William opened his eyes, his voice faint. Don't touch my things. It's mine." One paramedic exhaled. "You could lose your leg if we don't move this in the next few minutes. We're not waiting for permission." They asked me a few questions, mostly to confirm my identity and why I hadn't helped. I handed them the folder William had made. Forms, rules, even an email stating, "Eva is not allowed to touch any appliance without written authorization." They didn't comment, but I saw the weight in their eyes. Rosa stayed at the door. When the rescuers lifted William onto the stretcher, she quietly filmed. William, even then, muttered, "Careful, that chair's Italian. Don't scratch the floor." The stretcher rolled through the puddle, soap and water streaking under the wheels. William's gaze swept the room, trembling lips moving, until his eyes locked on me. But I didn't lower my head. I stood steady, phone still in my hand, the 911 call still open. Not long after the ambulance left, Mom entered my room. Her face was paper white, her voice hoarse. "Are you sure everything is properly documented?" I handed her a thick file. Inside were hundreds of handwritten permits, printed forms, even scans of emails between William and her about the household rules. She flipped through a few pages, then covered her face. I heard her crying, not sobs, but a strangled sound, like a chain snapping. Within 24 hours, I was contacted by a caseworker named Heidi from Child Protective Services. She asked to meet to verify details about the incident at our home. When I asked where she got the information, Heidi simply said, "We received video from a neighbor and the paramedics report. Things are about to change." Mom sat slumped on the sofa, still holding the rulebook William had left behind. At the top of each page, bold letters declared, "Private property, rights no trespass," signed with his jagged scrawl. Blue ink, crooked lines, yet pressed like an unshakable seal. I stood at the window, pale light cutting through thin curtains, making those words even more chilling. "I thought he only said it," Mom whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I never thought he'd actually write it out, page by page." I walked over, placing in her hands the thick binder I'd hidden for 3 months. Gray cover, organized by date, with photos of every time William demanded a permission slip. Mom flipped through, request to touch English textbook valid for 3 days. Then, request to turn on living room lights when temperature is below 64 degrees Fahrenheit. I said nothing, I didn't need to. On the 3rd day after the accident, William's sister Linda drove from Indianapolis to visit. Mom answered the door, and I watched from the stairs as Linda entered, clutching a brown leather bag, her face drawn with worry. She was the only one in William's family who had ever smiled at me. Not close, but every Thanksgiving she brought a homemade apple pie and asked me gentle questions. I came because I heard about William's accident, she told Mom. But something in this house isn't right. Mom met her gaze, weary. A lot isn't right, and I think you should see this. Linda sat down, flipping through the file. For nearly half an hour, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of turning pages. When she reached the page requiring written permission to use facial tissues, she slammed the binder shut, her eyes wide, lips pressed tight. "How long has my sister lived like this?" she asked Mom. But her eyes were on me. 6 months, I answered. He started writing it down after the fourth week. Linda shook her head, her face a mix of pity and fury. "I always thought William was controlling, but this is sickness." She left without goodbye, just placing a hand on Mom's shoulder before hurrying out. The next afternoon, William called from the hospital. His voice was flat, though I could hear the IV drip clicking in the background. "Linda came to the house, didn't she?" he asked bluntly. "She doesn't understand. She's being misled. That girl, Eva, she's always trying to tear things apart." Mom didn't answer. She set the phone on speaker, and I stood near the dining table, listening to every word. "You think she accidentally let the washer run loose?" Mom asked, her tone calm but sharp. "You think it was an accident?" William barked. "Who do you think ran that machine for 2 days straight? Who do you think wants the world to believe I'm insane?" I turned my face away, not out of fear, but because I couldn't fathom how he still believed he was the victim. That evening, Mom received an email from William's company's HR department. Sent by Jillian Stratton, Director of Human Resources, it requested confirmation about home environment concerns and William's current health. The message came from an internal address, signed digitally, marked confidential. No one spelled it out, but we knew something had surfaced. Mom looked at me, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What should I say?" I spoke gently. "Just tell the truth. They'll draw their own conclusions." The next morning, while I was washing my hands at the kitchen sink, Mom's phone rang. She put it on speaker. It was Jillian. "I just need to verify a few details," Jillian said, professional and steady. "We received an anonymous report from a colleague alleging that Mr. William Carter enforces extreme control at home, affecting the well-being of his stepdaughter. Can you confirm?" Mom paused. Then she spoke with a strength I'd never heard before, clear, unwavering. "Yes. I can confirm that William imposed strict rules on my daughter, denying her access to household items unless she obtained handwritten permission. I have copies." Jillian didn't interrupt. But I sensed her breath shift, like something had just been validated. "I'll need to record the rest of this call for our internal file," Jillian said. "And we may request your assistance in providing documents." After the call ended, Mom collapsed into the chair. I took her hand. No words were needed. Some truths, once placed where they belong, are enough to shatter walls of deceit piece by piece. And William, the man who once dictated every move in that house, was beginning to feel the cracks of the cage he had built himself. We left home that Monday morning, fog still heavy, the temperature barely 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Mom didn't say a word as she shut the car door. I sat beside her, backpack on my lap, a few clothes stuffed into a small bag. Behind us, the house where I once thought I'd grow up safe now, weighed on me like dust clogging my chest. Mom gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale, as we drove north on Highway 14. I looked in the rearview mirror, the house shrinking, blurred by mist. No one chased us, but something in my heart slowed, like an uneven beat. The motel Mom found was next to an old gas station on the town's edge. The neon sign flickered, one red and green letter sputtering like a faulty heartbeat. Room 103 was the only vacancy, with 2 twin beds and an air conditioner that clanked as if someone were hammering the ceiling. The window barely opened, and the carpet was so worn the concrete showed through. We dropped our bags. Mom sank onto the bed, still wearing her shoes. She pulled a bundle of folded hospital receipts from her purse. I saw the bold header, Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Below were 3 lines of emergency fees, each like a paragraph, totaling nearly $4,000. Not counting the ambulance, medication, and the rehab center where William was recovering. Mom tapped numbers into her phone, her lips pressed tight, fingers trembling. The house repairs aren't paid either, she muttered. The kitchen floor's warped. They said if water sat longer than 24 hours, we'd need to replace the subfloor. I pulled from my backpack 3 papers I'd saved, repair quotes from 2 contractors, and a photocopy of the insurance company's denial, citing owner negligence. Mom looked at me, eyes heavy with defeat. At first I thought if I just endured, things would settle. But the more I endured, the worse it became. I didn't blame her. Some things adults can't name out loud. Sometimes silence is survival. That night in the motel was so quiet, I could hear the vending machine down the hall whirring whenever someone pressed a button. I lay staring at the cracked ceiling. Mom lay awake on the other bed. We didn't speak, but I heard her sigh, again and again. Near midnight, her phone buzzed. She opened it silently, then handed it to me. It was an email from William, sent at 11:42 p.m., subject in all caps, alienation claim. In it, he wrote that unless Mom returned me home within 24 hours, he would file for temporary custody, accusing her of poisoning the child against the father figure and severely damaging family bonds. The paragraphs dragged like they'd been lifted from a legal blog. But the most chilling part was the closing line. William wrote, "I have documents, photos, and witnesses. Don't test my patience." Mom didn't reply to the email. She just sat there, silent in a way that scared me. I pulled the blanket up to my neck, as if afraid William could step right out of the screen. The next morning, Heidi Ward called. Her voice was low, steady, but gentle like a warm cloth placed on the forehead. "I've read the report from the paramedics and the video your neighbor provided," she said. "With the evidence we have, I'm preparing a petition for a temporary protective order. We need a clear legal boundary in place before William has the chance to turn this around." Mom asked, "Do you think the court will approve it?" Heidi answered, "Courts are cautious, but in this case, we have documents, witnesses, school records, and responses from William's HR department. They've also opened an internal investigation. That helps a great deal." I held the phone when Mom passed it to me, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if he actually sues?" "Eva, you have the right to speak the truth," Heidi said. "And you're not alone." After the call, Mom opened her wallet and took out $300. She counted each bill like she was cutting pieces of herself. Then she looked at me, her voice flat. "We can stay here for 4 nights. If nothing changes, I'll call Alyssa, my cousin in Springfield. We might have to go there." I nodded, but deep down, I didn't want to keep running. Not because I was braver than Mom, but because I knew if we kept fleeing, William would still believe he was in control. That night, I opened my phone and pulled up William's old email. I took screenshots of every page, every word, and saved them in a private folder with photos of the old permission slips. All of it was encrypted with a password, then backed up to an external drive. We drifted into sleep as daylight crept in. In my fragile dreams, I saw the kitchen flooding, permission slips floating like torn sails. I didn't call for help. I just stood in the water, holding a flashlight that illuminated nothing but my own shadow, bending across the floor. That morning, I woke before the sky turned bright. The yellow light from the motel hallway slipped under the door, cutting across the worn carpet. Mom sat at the desk, folding a white shirt she had ironed the night before with a mini iron borrowed from the front desk. The air smelled of damp carpet and cheap soap, but I barely noticed. My stomach was twisted tight. Today was court day. Mom handed me the outfit she had prepared. A peacock blue sweater and soft gray slacks. Not too formal, but proper enough. I dressed in silence, my hands trembling as I pulled the zipper. In the mirror, I saw myself a thin 16-year-old with dark circles under her eyes, hair tied neatly back, nothing left of the girl who had once smiled so wide in last year's holiday photo. The CPS bus picked us up outside the motel. Heidi sat in front, her eyes soft when she saw me. She didn't ask much, just nodded and handed Mom a thick folder of documents. Inside were copies of everything we had submitted over the past weeks, photos of the permission slips, school reports, Rosa's notes with dates and times, and the video of William pinned under the washer, still shouting about property rights. The courthouse was a 3-story red brick building, about a 10-minute drive from downtown. We were led into a small courtroom, old wooden benches, dim light, the smell of fresh ink mixed with floor cleaner. I sat beside Mom, our hands clasped tight. Across from us, William's side sat empty until the door swung open. William entered with a tall man in a black suit, gray pocket square tucked neatly in. His lawyer, I later learned, was Alan Hewitt, a specialist in complex family disputes. William limped, his left leg still in a brace, but his face betrayed no weakness. His eyes scanned the room with disdain, as if this was nothing but a cheap play I had staged. The judge was a middle-aged woman, hair graying in a neat bun, her demeanor calm. When she spoke, the room fell silent. This hearing is on the petition for a temporary protective order between Caroline Rivers, her daughter Eva Rivers, and William Carter. Attorney Hewitt presented first. His words were smooth, polished, every sentence like a rehearsed speech. He painted me as a teenager in a rebellious phase, prone to exaggeration, claiming William was only implementing a clear system of discipline, and that everything had been misunderstandings amplified by generational differences. I sat still, listening as if I were nothing more than a character in someone else's script. William nodded at intervals, glancing at me to gauge my reaction. When it was our turn, Mom let Heidi present. She pulled from the folder, one piece at a time, permission slips for drinking water, for turning on lights, for using toilet paper, alongside an email from William stressing, no exceptions for Eva, every interaction with household property requires approval. She also submitted the emergency call transcript, where paramedics documented, caller did not assist victim due to being forbidden to touch household items. Rosa was called as a witness. She brought her small notebook where she had logged dates and times when she saw me outside in the freezing yard, unable to enter because I'd forgotten to request door access. I've lived next door for 30 years, Rosa told the judge, her voice unwavering. I've never seen anyone force a child to file paperwork just to flip a light switch. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, each step like crossing a frozen river. The judge asked me to state my name and age. I answered firmly, keeping my voice steady. Eva Rivers, 16. Do you feel your daily life was restricted? She asked. I nodded. I wasn't allowed to open the fridge. I couldn't do homework because my books were sealed away. I had to ask permission to turn on the bathroom light. Once I requested use of the washer, but William hadn't signed, so I didn't touch it. The result was the machine running 2 days straight, causing the accident. The room fell silent. I glanced at William. He turned his head away. When Attorney Hewitt cross-examined, he asked, "Isn't it true you resisted your stepfather's rules by deliberately damaging property?" I replied softly, "I wasn't allowed to touch anything. How could I damage it?" He faltered, then shifted to another point. At the end, the judge sat quietly, reviewing the file. Finally, she lifted her head. Given the evidence of excessive control affecting a minor's well-being, the court grants a temporary protective order for 90 days, subject to extension. During this period, William Carter is prohibited from being alone with Eva Rivers and must complete a behavioral control therapy program assigned by an independent agency. She closed the file. Her voice was calm, but the weight of it held the entire room still. Hearing adjourned. Mom and I left the courthouse in the bitter February cold, the wind cutting through our coats like claws. The feeling wasn't relief, but a long, heavy pause. No one spoke much on the drive back to the motel. Mom kept her eyes on the road. I sat in the back, clutching Heidi's folder, leaning against the cold glass. 3 days later, we returned home briefly to collect more belongings. Heidi and William had been notified he would not be present. The house was hollow, like an empty shell, no footsteps echoing, no eyes watching from the stairs. Only the damp smell of water lodged in the wood and the ticking clock like a forgotten knock at the door. I walked into my room once, my only refuge now strange, cold. The blankets folded neatly, closet untouched. But on the bed lay something that made me stop. A small gift box wrapped in shiny foil placed squarely on the pillow. Beside it, a sealed yellow envelope. On the front, handwritten in blue ink, Eva, do the right thing. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the box first. Inside was a brand new tablet, screen, still covered in protective film, with a receipt from a local electronics store dated less than 2 days earlier. I looked up. Mom was still packing in the other room, unaware. I opened the envelope. Inside were 5 $100 bills, neatly folded, along with a note in William's handwriting. If you truly want this to end, just tell CPS you overreacted, that it wasn't that serious. The more you fight, the more you ruin your mother's life. This is your chance to fix it. I set both the note and the box aside, then pulled out my phone. I photographed everything: the wrapping, the tablet, the envelope, the scrawled handwriting. Each picture was another layer of protection for myself. I didn't touch the money or the device. I left them as they were, like an untouched crime scene. Mom walked in as I was zipping up the file bag. "Did you find something?" she asked. I showed her the photos. She stared at the handwriting, her face pale. "He thinks he can buy you off?" she whispered. I didn't answer. We just looked at each other, and in that look, everything was already understood. That night, back at the motel, Mom received a call from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered on speaker. "Caroline?" a man's voice said slowly. "It's Mark. I used to work in finance with William. You might remember me." Mom straightened. "I remember. What is it?" His tone dropped, cautious. "I don't want to meddle, but you should know. William has contacted a private attorney outside the company. They're gathering files to countersue. They're talking about defamation, damages, and loss of financial interest due to slander. Looks like William plans to use this to fight for custody." Mom said nothing. Her hand gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. "I know this is delicate," Mark went on, "but I've heard things about your daughter that didn't add up. And when I saw her name in HR's internal report, I couldn't stay silent." Mom murmured a thank you and ended the call. She sat for a long time, staring at the motel's lone window where the gas station light cast a crooked square on the floor. I spoke first. "I think he's scared. That's why he's striking back." Mom turned, her face no longer angry, but tight, like someone balancing on a thin rope. "We need to keep every piece of evidence, every page, every call. Nothing can slip." I nodded, plugging the backup USB into the laptop where I'd stored everything: photos of the bribe, Rosa's videos, hospital records, even local news articles titled, "Stepfather's Control, Teen Forbidden to Turn on Lights Without Permission." Every file was another crack in the mask William had worn for years. This time, he wouldn't be able to hide behind the rules he had built. That night, after Mark's call, Mom spread William's old files across the motel floor. Dozens of binders, folders, even crocodile leather notebooks he had guarded fiercely. Back when we lived under his roof, William kept them in a locked cabinet in his office. But after the accident, Mom had found the spare key in a desk drawer. We'd taken them as protection, never expecting what we'd uncover. I sat cross-legged, opening each folder, checking sealed envelopes. Most were financial statements, stock reports, tax records, clean, organized, almost perfect. But in the last pocket of a black binder, I pulled out an envelope stamped in typewriter font Times New Roman. Internal review, employee conduct, confidential. I looked up and handed it to Mom. She opened it carefully. Inside were 3 stapled pages. Each word made the room feel heavier. It was a warning letter from the law firm Manning and Walsh in Pennsylvania, where William had once worked before moving to Illinois. It stated clearly, after complaints from 3 colleagues regarding excessive control of the work environment, infringement on privacy, and creating undue stress for female staff, Mr. William Carter was temporarily reassigned to a non-managerial role. The investigation later closed due to insufficient public evidence, but the record remains filed for internal purposes. The next page was an HR note, where an employee had written in blue ink, "Shows signs of psychological control. Frequently requires staff to report their seating position, chair height, bathroom breaks. One employee quit after 3 months due to stress." Mom lowered the paper, her hands visibly trembling. "He was investigated before, and then repeated the same pattern with you," she whispered, her voice like wind slipping through a half-open window. "I photographed every page with my phone. Then I used the mini scanner Heidi had given me before the hearing to create digital copies with verified timestamps. I emailed the entire file to Heidi through a secure account and sent another copy to the attorney assigned through the county's child protection program. Just 15 minutes later, Heidi called back. "This is a critical piece," she said, her tone cautious but electric. "It shows the behavior wasn't just confined to the family, it has a prior history. This could shift the balance in the long-term custody ruling." She advised me to keep the originals sealed in a file bag. Someone from CPS would collect them the next day to place into the official record. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the desk, writing out a complete log of events from the washing machine running until it broke, to the time William forced me to stand outside in the freezing yard because I forgot to request permission to open the back door. I printed the log, organized it by month, and placed it into separate binders. Each entry was now a piece of a truth no one had believed when it only came from the mouth of a child. 3 days later, William's current company, Southbridge Capital, summoned my mother for additional information. We arrived at a 6-story glass building on the west side of the city, where the guest floor was furnished with gray velvet chairs and carried the faint scent of expensive perfume. A receptionist led us to the 4th floor, into a conference room under surveillance cameras. The person in charge was a woman named Jillian Stratton, with cropped hair, a firm voice, and scrutinizing eyes. One of our employees submitted a copy of the washer video and the daily permission slips. "Mr. William Carter required you to sign," she said, her fingers gliding over a computer screen. At first, we thought it was fabricated, but after verifying the handwriting and source documents, everything matched perfectly. She turned the screen toward me. It showed 3 clips Rosa had recorded. Me standing outside in the yard, me holding a slip to enter the kitchen, and the moment William screamed as the washer pinned his leg, still shouting, "Don't touch, don't touch, that's mine." Jillian went silent for a moment, then said, "We've issued a notice of temporary suspension for William Carter pending next week's ethics board meeting. If the evidence continues to hold, termination of his employment is very likely." Mom didn't speak, she just nodded, holding my hand. I felt her fingers icy as if dipped in a basin of cold water, gripping so tightly I couldn't pull away even if I wanted. As we left the building, passing through reception, a young employee walked by and looked at me as though something had just clicked. Not pity, not contempt. More like shock, like he had once believed in the image of a model citizen William Carter, and was now confronted with a version no one dared admit. I stepped out of the glass lobby, lifted my head toward the pale light cutting through Chicago's gray sky. The wind struck across my face. Not gentle, not violent, just a reminder that things were shifting, and nothing could stay hidden behind. The locked doors of so-called control. I had just left the bathroom when I found William blocking the hallway, standing under the dim lights of the ground floor corridor. The lamp behind him threw his face into shadow, leaving only his eyes glowing with that familiar fire, the same gaze that had paralyzed me for months. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice low and deliberate, as if he were holding himself in check. I stepped back, clutching my phone in my palm. Ever since leaving home, I had kept the recorder ready whenever I felt danger. I tilted the screen slightly, slid my thumb over the microphone icon, and slipped it into the pocket of my hoodie, leaving the speaker exposed. "I have nothing to say to you," I answered evenly. William stepped closer, blocking the path to the stairs. I saw Mom's door at the far end of the hall, still closed. My back pressed against the wall, leaving no more than 2 strides between us. "You've destroyed everything," he muttered. "My reputation, my job, this family, and you did it all just for attention." I clasped my hands together, drawing a long breath. "I only told the truth." "That's not the truth," William snapped. "You cherry-picked details, twisted them, turned them into some victim's tale. You know I never meant harm. I just wanted order, discipline, the way a family should be." The air felt thicker. His voice dropped lower, but each word tore through the line between reason and fear. "You need to retract what you told CPS. Rewrite the report. Say it was a misunderstanding. You still have a chance to fix this before it goes too far." I held his gaze. "I won't change my statement." His face tightened. He raised a hand as if to grip my shoulder, but before he touched me, a voice called out. "William." He turned. Rosa stood at the end of the hallway, holding a trash bag. The yellow light behind her lit her silver hair like a halo. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "I heard everything, and I can testify, if necessary." William stepped back. For a moment I saw a flicker in his eyes, not fear of exposure, but fear of losing control. The order, authority, and polished image he had built were cracking right in front of him. He said nothing more, just turned and strode toward the stairs. Rosa set the trash bag down and walked over. She touched my shoulder lightly, her eyes soft. "Are you all right?" I nodded. My throat was tight, but my heart beat steadier. I pulled out my phone, stopped the recording, and saved the file under the name Hallway Confrontation. The next morning, Heidi arrived at the motel earlier than usual. I handed her the recording along with Rosa's signed statement. Heidi didn't say much, she just squeezed my hand, then placed everything into a new red folder labeled Urgent Update Supplemental Evidence. "The final hearing is scheduled for this Friday," she said, her eyes lingering on me. "This time the court will decide on permanent custody. If we succeed, real change will follow." The final hearing was held in the county courthouse, in a larger courtroom with space for local press and 2 rows for family. I recognized some of William's former colleagues in the back, alongside his sister Linda, her face etched with exhaustion and grief. I sat beside my lawyer and Mom, feeling the heavy binders in my backpack pressing down on my shoulders, but also feeling, for the first time, that I wasn't alone. William arrived on time, dressed neatly, hair combed. Beside him was attorney Alan Hewitt, still exuding cold confidence. The judge entered, and the room stilled. Everyone rose, then sat again in silence. Hewitt presented first, speaking at length about emotional strain from job stress, trying to rebuild the picture of a misunderstood father. But this time the judge cut him off in under 10 minutes. "We have received an internal report from Manning and Walsh, where Mr. William Carter was investigated for excessive staff control," she said. "Along with the most recent testimony of Rosa Lyons and the recording of the unlawful confrontation." Hewitt turned slightly toward William. I saw William press his lips together, his eyes flicking toward me, no fire now, only confusion. The judge called me to the stand. I rose, gripping the file in my bag, and stepped forward with a calmness I had never known before. "Would you like to add anything to your prior testimony?" she asked. I nodded. "I want to submit a new recording and a signed statement from Mrs. Rosa. It documents the moment William approached me outside of legal bounds and demanded I retract my testimony. I also want to submit the file from his previous employer in Pennsylvania, showing this pattern is not new." Each folder was laid before the judge. She turned page by page, deliberate, steady. "Do you feel safe in Mr. William Carter's presence?" she asked, her eyes fixed on me. I kept mine steady. "No, and never have." The words rang through the courtroom. William lowered his head, his hands clasped tight. When our lawyer played the washer video and displayed the signed permission slips in William's handwriting, whispers rippled through the room. One of his former colleagues in the back bowed his head, shaking slightly. Linda covered her face with both hands. The judge delivered her ruling in a voice not loud but firm enough to still every breath. "After reviewing the evidence, witness testimony, and the history of extended behavior, the court grants permanent custody of minor Eva Rivers to Mrs. Caroline Rivers. Mr. William Carter is barred from private contact with Eva in all forms. He is also required to complete a behavioral program under public supervision, effective immediately." I didn't look at William. I looked at Mom. She held my hand, her eyes still trembling, but this time with something else release. Our new apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building near the school district. The walls were painted pale beige, the wood floors scratched in places. The window frames creaked when the wind pressed hard. But when I stepped inside, it felt as though a boulder I had carried for years dropped away. No cameras, no permission slips. No voice commanding me to square my shoulders, line up my shoes, or switch off lights at 8:45. We had just 2 small bedrooms, a living room connected to the kitchen, and a desk by the window. Mom used her savings from a new account to cover the first 6 months' rent. I thought I would cry over losing the old house, the pink bedroom from elementary school, the piano I had gotten one Christmas at age 8. But instead, the only thing that choked me up was breathing free air on an ordinary afternoon, without anyone counting my steps from the door to the kitchen. "This one's yours," Mom said, opening the smaller bedroom door. "It'll take time to set up, but I thought the desk should be by the brightest window." I nodded, standing in the empty room, pen still in my hand, sunlight painting a soft yellow stripe across the ceiling. The first morning in our new home, I woke not to heavy footsteps in the hall, but to birdsong outside. Mom brewed coffee. I packed my backpack. We sat side by side on the wooden chairs by the kitchen. We didn't speak much, but there was warmth in the silence not meant to dodge punishment, but to feel peace. I went back to school the following week. The counseling office welcomed me with a gentle, non-judgmental conversation. Miss Julia, the school counselor, was a woman with graying curls, a low voice, and eyes that never looked away. "I heard you have a habit of keeping detailed daily journals," she said, opening her notebook and flipping through a few pages of notes. I smiled faintly. "I write so I can remember. Sometimes it's to check if I'm just imagining things." She nodded, smiling. But sometimes it's also to preserve what's real. That's an important skill. Many adults can't even do that. She introduced me to the tutoring support group, helping set up a schedule so I could catch up on my core classes without too much stress. My classmates welcomed me back with a bit of awkwardness, but no gossip. A few kids had heard bits about the case, but I learned how to choose who to keep at a distance. CPS still visited regularly. Each time Miss Heidi came, she brought new forms, but the air was no longer stiff the way it had been at the start. She sat and had tea with my mom, chatting gently before quietly jotting notes in her pad. "This apartment may be small, but it has good energy," she remarked, looking around the living room where Mom was working on an unfinished embroidered tablecloth. "Most importantly, the air feels lighter. Both of you are breathing easier." I knew she was right. As for William, scattered updates trickled in from Mom's old acquaintances. The company he had worked for officially fired him after the full records from Pennsylvania were shared across the industry's internal system. No one called him anymore. No colleagues spoke up in his defense. The people who once praised him at the Rotary Club now quietly kept their distance. I didn't feel joy knowing he lost everything. Only relief that no one could stand outside my bedroom door with that stare I once had to hold my breath to endure. One afternoon, I was folding clothes when Mom came home with a bag of vegetables, bread, a few boxes of frozen food, and a small bouquet. "I passed by the discount shop," she said, putting things into the fridge with a smile. The flowers were only $2 and fresher than you'd believe. I opened the fridge, arranging the food. On the third shelf, a cup of yogurt sat neatly beside a block of mozzarella cheese, the kind I like to eat with toast. When I closed the fridge, the lingering light inside reflected my face on the microwave door opposite. I let out a quiet laugh, not because of anything big, but because of the simple feeling that I had the right to arrange my own refrigerator without anyone's permission. I no longer needed a signature to drink water after 8 p.m. I didn't have to raise my hand for approval before opening a window. I didn't have to record things in secret or worry about someone reading my journal. I walked to the desk by the window, where a sticky note was taped to the corner of my new computer screen, a donated gift from the school's fund for students in special circumstances. On it, Mom had written in purple ink, "Tomorrow you have art class. Don't forget your paint box. And if you're tired, rest. We don't take attendance at home." I sat down, opened the computer, and typed a few notes. Outside the window, the sound of children running in the courtyard mixed with the soft clang of a streetcar in the distance. This apartment had no expensive furniture, no leather sofa, no induction cooktop. But it had freedom, it had breath that wasn't compressed. And it had something I once thought I'd never know: the feeling of being myself without being controlled, without being doubted, without being defined by someone else's gaze. A home, even a small one, doesn't need special keys or permission slips to touch its doors. And a smile, even fleeting on my lips, is enough to remind me everything now truly belongs to me. If you've listened all the way here, maybe somewhere in my story, something touched you. Maybe it's a corner of your own childhood memory, a relationship that once made you feel suffocated, or simply the belief that no matter how deep the wounds, people can still rise and find light again. I don't tell this story to stir pity. I tell it because I believe many out there have felt what I once did, being controlled, silenced, forced to live by permission slips someone else created. But sometimes it only takes one door opening, one hand daring to say enough, and life can be redrawn in your own way. What about you? Have you ever lived in an environment that made you feel you couldn't breathe? Have you ever had to ask for permission just to be yourself? If you recognize something in my story, whether in your life or someone you've known, share it in the comments below. I want to hear your story, because maybe what you share could bring hope to someone else. And if you found meaning in what I've shared, follow this channel to join me in discovering more everyday stories filled with strength, stories about family, pain, healing, and the courage to begin again.